This
everyone.
conference will now be recorded.
So I have just created a virtual machine called Jenkins VM, and I've just before starting this session, I just created a Windows Server 2019 on top of it, and we will start today with the concept of Jenkins. Now again, what really is Jenkins and what is the need of it when you have Azure DevOps? What's, let's say, the need of Jenkins, let's say, when you're using something like Azure DevOps as such? Let me create a new diagram out here. Let's say it is Jenkins, let's say bank diagram, and let's say create. Again, the thing here is that Jenkins is an open source continuous integration tool. Can you use it for continuous deployments? Yes, but I have seen a lot of businesses using it for continuous integrations and managing their own, kind of softwares and managing their own software development lifecycle. So Jenkins is a very, very, very popular CI tool, but this is slowly being replaced by Azure DevOps and etc. Especially when you are coming from a cloud platform called Azure and you are using Azure DevOps in order to manage all your softwares and etc. It's an easier way to do it. But in your career as a DevOps engineer, especially when you say that I have some kind of an experience out here, you must have come from some or the other background, whether Jenkins or Linux or something like that. That is the first reason why are we seeing Jenkins. Secondly, it will be an addition to your career, telling that okay, fine, the candidate that I'm kind of hiring also knows something about Jenkins. Like, it's not everything blank, you know something about Jenkins out here. So this is an additional CI tool that we are learning on top of Azure DevOps to see how we can configure, how we can manage, how we can build our software using something known as Jenkins out here. So Jenkins, again, open source CI tool, continuous integration tool, and we'll see how to basically interact with Jenkins and all that stuff. So any questions on this, guys, before we make a start to it? So let me do an RDP into this machine, and let me firstly log into this machine. Let's say test user Microsoft hyphen 001, and this is a Windows server, right? So I need to understand how to install Jenkins on a Windows server. Now the best way to understand that is by using Microsoft documentations. Sorry, is by using Jenkins documentations. Documentation installing Jenkins. Where do you want to install? Windows. For example, let's say Mac OS and all that stuff. Let's see, Windows. So you can install Jenkins on top of, let's say, Macintosh. You can install Jenkins on top of, let's say, Linux and etc. And when I type in Windows, it tells me okay, fine. You know what? It needs at least 256 56 GB of RAM and 1 GB of hard drive space, and something like this for small teams and etc. You can basically create something like this. So what I'm doing is I'm creating Jenkins on a Windows server. So I'm basically doing all these operations on a Windows server out here. So what I'll say, I'll just go to my local server, disable my IE, enhance security, so that I can install the softwares and do all that stuff. So I'll say off, and I'll say okay. I'll just close this window, and the first thing that I'll do is install a Chrome browser on top of my website, on top of my Internet Explorer, because Chrome is much more faster than IE, and it supports a lot. You can also do it in Internet Explorer, not a problem. I can also try doing it in Internet Explorer, but cannot guarantee that it's fast and etc. So what we will be doing is, firstly we will be downloading a software known as Jenkins. And even before we will be downloading and installing something known as Jenkins, one thing outrightly is that Jenkins runs on a Java based platform. Jenkins needs Java, and Jenkins needs something known as Java 11 or Java 8. These are the two things what Jenkins as of now is supporting. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all these are not supported. 9, everything not supported. 7 and prior are not supported. Java 8 runtimes is supported, and Java 11 is the best stable environment for Jenkins. How do I know it? I've just looked at the documentation and I'm just telling it about, this is what it is. So I'll just go into, let's say, the Internet Explorer, and I'll say Java 11 download. So it says okay fine Java 11 and all that stuff. It says Java 11 archive download. Let's see this out. Yeah, it says okay fine. Now Java is being owned by Oracle, being licensed out by Oracle and etc. So it says okay fine, it's an open source tool and all that stuff and all. And if I come down here, it says I have like different operating systems that I can offer, but I am looking for Windows 64 installer because this is a 64-bit architecture. So I'm saying download Java. I'll say yes, I reviewed all this thing, and I'll say download this Java out here. Now it says, can you please give me your Oracle ID, your Oracle account and ID? If you don't have one, it's a very easy process to create. Just like a Gmail account, you can create it. Now I have an account with me, like I have a user account with me. I have like created it to avoid the wasting of time. So this is the user account, which is user jenkins092@gmail.com, and the password is this. If you are a bit lazy and do not want to create your own account, you can use this also. I have no issues. You can use this also to, let's say, go ahead and log into your Oracle. And once you log in, it'll say, okay, fine, I'm okay to go ahead and download Java JDK, which is Java Development Kit. So SDK is a software development kit. Till now we were looking at SDKs and all, right? So it's now saying okay fine Java Development Kit is kind of starting to installation. I'll say okay fine, a very simple installation. Again I'll say next, and I'll kind of sign into it. So I'll basically kind of install Java into my virtual machine, a server which is running on what, Windows Server 2019. I'll say great, I'll close. The first and very first thing that you need to do out here is download Java. So let's write all the steps that we are kind of doing out here in our notepad file so that we keep a track of everything. Firstly, download Java and one specific version of Java which is called Java 11, and this is a JDK, Java Development Kit. Secondly, Jenkins is a CI tool, right? Is what a CI? Meaning, at the end of the day, you will be going ahead and pulling your code from some kind of a source control or a version control. Source control or a version control, you will be pulling your code from somewhere, right? Very famous is what? Git. Meaning the underlying platform for something very famous is Git. So what I'll do, I'll install Git. So second step I'll do is I'll install something known as Git out here on my virtual machine. Installation of Git. Install Git 64-bit. So I'll go here and I'll say download and install Git for Windows. I'll say this Git for Windows, great. I'll say Git download packaging, fine, not a problem. I'll say 64-bit installation and I'll say run. And once this is there, I'll go ahead and install this out. Again, very simple. Next, and next. So I'm just going with all the default profile out here. I'll say install. So Git is being installed on my machine right now. Second thing that I did is installation of what? Git. Third thing will be installation of Jenkins itself. Jenkins is a software, is an installable software. So I will say download Jenkins for Windows. And it will say okay fine Jenkins download and deployment, and this is installed. So I'll just say I don't want to see the release notes. I'll just say finish. I'll just say download Jenkins. It says jenkins.io. There are two versions right now, 2.3.0.3.2 LTS long term support, 2.3.1.6. Since it's a long term support, I'm going for 2.3 and I'm downloading the Windows version of it. So you have multiple versions out there. I'm downloading the Windows installer because I'm doing it on a Windows operating system, right? So I'm installing the Windows version of it. Now it says okay fine, welcome to the Jenkins setup, and I'll say okay fine, great, next. It says okay fine, this is the folder that I will install Jenkins in, are you okay with it? I'll say okay, I'll be okay with that. Now it says, you know what, when you install Jenkins, Jenkins will run as a service onto your machine. Onto your Windows machine, Jenkins runs as a service. Can you give me the account and the password that has a capability for auto logon? Because this service should be logging in. Sorry, this service should be starting up by its own. No one should come ahead and start it out, because that's what you want. Whenever your system restarts, the service should again kick in back. So can you give me an account? I will say the account that I created for, or the account basically using which I created this virtual machine, which is test user, and I'll say Microsoft hyphen 001. I'll say test the credentials. It says the account is either doesn't have a privilege to log on as a service account, meaning this account that you're using does not have a privilege to do an auto logon. Can you please give me an account which has auto logon? I'll say, okay, fine. Then how do I resolve this error? Now this class entirely is going to be about errors and how do you resolve this, guys. This class entirely we'll be discussing about how do you make errors and how do you resolve it. Okay. So I get this error. What do I do now? Go back to the Jenkins documentation and come back here into the Jenkins installation and says this is the step. The first step is this, second step is this. This is where I'm getting an error. It's telling invalid login. How do I resolve it? It's telling, okay, fine. These are the steps you need to follow to resolve this out. So let's follow the same steps. So the first thing it's asking me is going to something known as administrative tools. And in the administrative tools, go for something known as local account policies, or let's see, local accounts, local security policies. So open this out. It says local accounts. Let's say local accounts. Let's see, where is it asking me to go? Fine. It says data, local policy, user rights management. So user rights management, and I need to look for an account which gives me an auto logon. So I'd say, okay, fine. Go to something known as logon as a service and do a right click there. So coming here, it says logon as a service, and I'll say add a user or a group, and I'll say test user. Check names. Jenkins VM test user. I'll say add this user as what? As a privilege to log on automatically. This is done. Now I'll come back to my Jenkins installation and say test credentials. Now it's done. So the ID and the account that you're giving needs to have a privilege to auto login as a service into the Jenkins server, and the password should be right. These are the two things that I'll consider. I'll say next. Now it says, you know what, Jenkins communicates over a port called 8080, which is the outbound port for communication and the inbound communication port. Can you test this port, because I want to see if the port is working? It says great, it's allowed in the firewall. I'm good with it. Next. Now it says, you know what, Jenkins needs something known as Java, and Java 11 is something that is supported right now. Only Java 1.8 and Java 11 are supported right now. That's the reason I installed Java 11. Though it says in documentation that Java 8 is also supported, now Jenkins installation is no longer supporting Java 8. That's the reason I installed Java 11, and it was able to automatically identify that yes, the user has something known as Java 11 out here. Next. It says firewall exception, not a problem. I'll say next. I'll say install. That's it. This is the installation procedure for Jenkins, and I'll say finish. And now Jenkins will try to start up on my local machine on a port called localhost 8080. Jenkins now will start in my browser, and it will attempt to start in this particular browser on a port called what? Port 8080, because that's the port of what? The communication for Jenkins. And Jenkins is installed as a service out here. Now if you kind of go here into my program files out here, into my machine, and go to my program files. Let's open it up. And let's see C drive and program files out here. And you'll see something known as Jenkins out here. and you'll have all these things. Very importantly, Jenkins exe, this is the application which is controlling everything. So come down, it says, you know what, you'll need to firstly unlock Jenkins, meaning when you install Jenkins you will get a password. Can you give me the password? Now I don't know where the password is. It is outright on your screen telling you that, you know what, go to this particular location out here, which is the initial password. So I'll say okay, great, I'll go to this particular location in my C drive, and it says how do you want to open it. I'll select notepad. This is the password that I need, initial password to unlock your Jenkins account. Copy, paste, next. Now it says okay, fine. Jenkins, in order to function, needs something known as plugins. Meaning, Jenkins is an open source tool which supports a lot of plugins. Meaning, for CI, it supports one plugin. For integration, it supports one plugin. For working with Git, it supports a plugin. So, what I'll say is that, you know what, install all the suggested plugins. I'm good with that. And I'll select install all this. And now it will install all these things out. In this, you have Git, pipelines, and all that stuff. Email extensions and all the plugins basically that are needed by the Jenkins server in order to perform properly. So I'm going ahead and installing all those plugins, let's say in Jenkins out here. So this is the installation procedure of what, the plugins in Jenkins. And then I'll start up Jenkins out there. So this is all just the setup of Jenkins. We haven't even looked into something known as the CI pipeline and etc. It's just the setup of Jenkins. That's it. It's just what I'm doing. I'm setting up Jenkins. I'm installing Jenkins and making sure the Jenkins is ready for me to use. Guys, until here, any questions that I can take, anything that I can take?
It's a mandatory that we need a Jenkins servers to be set up, or can we use our local system as a Jenkins?
You can use your local system as a Jenkins, Chandra, but I wouldn't recommend that because you need to, going further, you need to do something called firewall unblocking and all that stuff. So just for a practice, if you're looking to do it, then I would say just create a virtual machine for an hour, then kind of delete it out. Local system, yes, you can definitely do it. You can set up Jenkins in your local system, not an issue. You can try that out also.
Okay.
But
What is
even before,
real,
yeah,
in real environment? What will be the setup for Jenkins?
you will definitely use a server. You will 101% use a server here in real-time environment, because if you set up in your local machine, right, your local machine may not be accessed by everyone in your organization, right? Because everyone in your organization now needs to use Jenkins as a CI tool. So how will they use it? So that's the reason you will create it on a server. Okay. So it's asking me to create the first admin user, meaning the first administrator user as such. So I'll say it is test user Microsoft hyphen 001. Confirm the password called Microsoft hyphen 001. I'll say this is Jenkins user. I'll just give the Jenkins user at the rate gmail.com, something like this. At the rate gmail.com. I'll just save and continue. It says okay, fine, this is the Jenkins URL. Whenever you want to kind of invoke Jenkins, you can go to this particular link called localhost something something something. So just copy this out. So in this particular local user some 8080 port, you'll have Jenkins basically getting invoked. So Jenkins is ready. I'll say start using Jenkins. So now Jenkins is kind of signing you in, and this is how the UI of Jenkins kind of looks like. On the top right hand corner, you will have something known as Jenkins user out here. You can log out and you can do all that stuff out here. Now the question is that, can I take this URL? Can I now use this URL on any other machine? Because this is a central server, right? This is one Windows virtual machine. This is an administrator Windows virtual machine. You do not have access to log into it. Then can I use this particular localhost 8080 on any of the machine? This is my machine. I'm trying to go into localhost 8080 and I'm trying to open up the service. It says, you know what, I am sorry, I cannot allow you to use this service. I don't even know what you're trying to say. So how do other users then access Jenkins? How do you unblock Jenkins so that even the rest of the users access Jenkins without having to log into the virtual machine? Can you do that? Yes, definitely. How can you do that? Firstly, I'll go into something known as, in this particular virtual machine, I'll go into the firewall of it. Windows Defender Firewall, open this out. I'll say advanced settings. I'll say inbound and outbound rules. I'll add something, okay? So I'm saying inbound rules and I'm saying adding a new rule out here. And I'm saying this is a port that I want to unblock. And the port number is 8080. Because that's where Jenkins is listening. Say next. I'll say allow the connection. I'll say next. I'll say this is port 8080 inbound. Done. Same thing I'll do for an outbound rule, because Jenkins needs outbound and inbound communications, right? So I'll say next port. I'll say again 8080 is the port that I want to unblock. I'll say next. I'll say allow the connection. I'll say next. I'll say next again. Now I'll say out 8080 allow a meaningful rule name. I'll say finish. That's it. I'm done with this. This is what OS level change. Should I also change at the infra level? Definitely yes. You also need to change at the infra level also. What do you do? What do you do is like go into the networking and say add an inbound rule. Just called any rule, any custom, anything is okay for me. 8080 is the one that I'm looking at. I'll say 8080, this is inbound. So I'm adding an inbound rule here. The same way I'll add an outbound rule here. Where am I adding this? In the network security group rules, right? So I'll add another rule here called any, and then I'll say this is the direction out, and I'll say this is port 8080 out, or allow, something like this, some meaningful name. Let's say add. So I am unblocking a port at the OS level, and I'm unblocking a port at the infra level also. Guys, can I now do localhost 8080? Will it load? Any answers
No,
to this?
no, we need to use the IP address.
Exactly. Very well said. We need to use the IP address of this particular machine, because localhost 8080 is my local machine, right? This is the IP address of the machine. Take this out. You will have Jenkins running out of the machine hosted in an Azure cloud. Now the advantage of this is that if I create number of users, can I create number of users? Yes, you can create number of users in Jenkins. All the users do not need to have access to my machine. I don't want to give access to my Windows machine to all the users. This is the biggest advantage of having Jenkins like this. Just unblock one port. Can you unblock? Yes, you can definitely. If you're using a service like Jenkins, you can do that. And why am I allowing a public IP? Because right now I do not want to do point to site and everything. But let's say if you are, it's only in your organization, people have to connect to a VPN and then use the private IP and then do an 8080 over it. Will it work? Definitely it will work. If you have established something known as point to site connection. So this is how we are linking things around. So for now, our practice I'm doing, let's say, over a public IP. So I'll say it is test user. I am using the administrator account and I'm saying Microsoft -001 sign in. The same UI again. So never the same UI again. I say basically Jenkins is like, kind of configured here, and the same UI kind of presents itself out here also. Guys, good with this? Are we good till now?
Yes.
Okay, now is the time. Okay, fine. I'll just go into the server for, I need to configure something else also. Now, this is what primarily what a continuous integration tool, right? Meaning it needs to rely upon an external source. It doesn't have a repository of its own. Jenkins doesn't have a repository of its own. It's a purely a continuous integration tool or a build tool is what we can call. Release, yes, you can do it, but we'll come down to that later. It's purely a build tool. Most of the organization, 90% of the organizations use it as a build tool out here. So I know that for sure what am I building? I'm building a code. Where is my code? In some Git repository. To configure that particular thing, to configure Git into this particular Jenkins, I need to come down to something known as manage Jenkins, configure system, and let's wait for this to open up. Okay, so this has all these local host and etc. So not this one. So let's say come down to configurations again. Configuration. Okay, that's fine. Again, manage Jenkins. Let's say global tool configuration. It says okay, fine. These are the tools that I right now have. JDK I have already it, and I need a git.exe. I need what? A git.exe out there. So do you have Git installed on your machine? I know that Git is installed on my machine. Where do I have the Git installed? It's here, this particular path. In bin, you have something known as a git.exe, right? I'll just copy this folder path. I just put this folder path out here, / git.exe. This is how I configure something known as git out here. I need to point Jenkins to git.exe so that it can use git.exe and do all the git commit and all that stuff, meaning download all the code from the git repository and all that stuff. This is what I am firstly doing, and I'll say apply. I'll say save. So I have saved this out. So these are a couple of options in Jenkins to go ahead and configure your tools. Can you go ahead and add users in Jenkins? Yes. Under a tab called manage users, you can say create new users out here. So you can create users and also assign access on top of them. So let's say what access do they have and etc. So I'll come down to back to the dashboard. I'll come down here. Now the question here is that how do I create a CI pipeline in Jenkins? How do I do that? Is that I need to go into something known as new item out here, and I'll say a freestyle project. A project in Jenkins means it's a CI pipeline or a pipeline out here. So I'll say it is, my project name is called something like random quotes, something like this, and I'll say it's a freestyle project. I'll say okay. Now it's asking me a couple of questions like source codes, what is a build trigger and all that stuff. Now what I'll do is that I'll say this is a test project. I'll just give a sample description so that anyone coming into your project can look at this out. Come down and you have something known as source code management. I'll give the source code management as what? Git. It's now asking me the repository URL for Git. Now I have a repository URL with me. Like this is the repository URL that I basically use. So here there is some code here. If you look at this, right, there is some code here which is like developed in .NET Core. Like this is a .NET Core here. So I am just taking this particular link. I can also give you the same link to you guys also. You can use the same thing in order for this, in order for to practice this particular demo. So I'll just paste it here in this particular chat window. You can take this link out and refer this out. So what I am doing out here, and as I'm telling that, okay, fine, this is the Git URL that I have, and this is a public Git repository. It says please enter a Git repository. Now it's done. It's a public Git repository, meaning you don't need to enter any credentials. Now it's asking which branch. I'll say okay, fine, it's a master branch or a main branch. I'm good with that. Now it's asking me what kind of a build trigger you want. Trigger build remotely is something like CI. Then you have something like build periodically, scheduled, something known as poll SCM. Source control management, meaning at regular intervals, go ahead and look if there is any code. Go ahead and look if there is any, let's say, changes and etc. And all this, right? The polling and all that stuff, right? It works on something known as a cron expression. Cron expression. So I'll say take a cron expression for every 5 minutes, meaning I want this pipeline to trigger, or I want Jenkins to every 5 minutes go into my repository in GitHub and check for any code changes. So I'm taking this tab and I'm saying this is a cron expression that I'm giving, and I'll give the cron expression out here. This is how I mention it. So it's telling, okay, fine, spread the load evenly using something like this rather than this. So I'm okay. I'll say, okay, fine. I'll take the suggestion from Jenkins and I'll put here a cron calculator. So you can use this websites to in order to calculate the cron. It's like minute, hour, day, month, and day. It just represents everything like that. So for every hour, every 5 minutes of an hour, I'll go ahead and trigger this build is what I'm trying to, or I'll go ahead and trigger this pipeline is what I'm just telling Jenkins out here. Now it says, okay, fine, the build environment is all fine. The very important thing I need to look at here is the build steps. Now it's a .NET application, guys. It's a .NET Core application. What do you think should be the steps that I need to incorporate here? Anyone?
Yeah, we need Nug.
Java, Jenkins.
Sorry? Uh, just yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Sanjay.
Java and Jenkins we need to add, right?
Okay, but I also I already have Java and Jenkins with me. Now I am trying to build out what a code that is built in what .NET Core, right? So if I were to give you an Azure DevOps pipeline, what will be the steps you will include in that?
NuGet, install, restore, build.
Okay, will it be NuGet install or will it be .NET install or .NET restore? This is a .NET Core application. It's a
Then
not,
we go for the .NET.
right? We go for what? .NET restore, .NET publish, and .NET build. Three things that we go for, right? So here you do not have, unlike Azure DevOps, you do not have a very kind of a pleasy environment. You'll need to give all the steps by your own self. I'll say execute a Windows batch command. And now I'll start looking for what is the command that I need. So the command that I want is a .NET restore. So I'll say .NET restore command. I'll see what are the options inside it. This is how I would do it. Okay. So .NET restore, I'm not a developer, but I need to understand what .NET restoration is. Like yesterday we did a .NET restore, right? The same thing I'm going to do right now. Saying I'll say .NET restore, and it's giving me a couple of parameters like all these things out. I'm like good with this. So I'll take the .NET restore out here. Or if you don't know the parameters, you can also do, if you have .NET in your SDK in your laptop, you can do a .NET restore -help h. It'll give you all the commands that you can use along with .NET restoration. So I'll say I'll take this command, go into my server, into my Jenkins server, .NET restore. I'll do a .NET restore out here. Is restoration alone sufficient? No. I also need a build step and a publish step, right? So if you go to the Azure DevOps pipeline out here, let's say if I go to my Azure DevOps pipeline in order to see what are the steps. Let's say I don't know what are the steps, okay? I want to firstly see what are the steps out here. Go into your pipeline. And let's say go into the core pipeline out here. Edit. What all is it doing here? It's doing a restore, build, publish. Three things. Like sonar analysis, all these things is something that we don't need at this point. So restore, build, and publish. Three things is something that I want to integrate with Jenkins. So what I'm going to do is like I'll come here. I did a restore. I'll say execute a batch command again, and I'll say .NET build. And are there any other parameters that I need to pass it .NET build? Let's see. So .NET build command again, or you can even see here the .NET build is doing something like this, and it's giving a hyphen configuration build configuration, meaning in which configuration that I want to basically build this out. So I can take this parameter out here called hyphen configuration, and I'll put hyphen configuration. I'll say the configuration of the code is release, not debug. I want to release the code in something known as release configuration. And finally, I'll do a publish. Again, this command is what? .NET publish. So .NET publish, then you can pass all these things out. So again, I'll take this particular configuration task out here. I'll go here. I'll say .NET publish. I'll say same thing out here. Just configuration as release. I'll say save. It's done. Now, how do you trigger the build? Build now. It says build is scheduled, and in a minute you will be able to see the build here. So let's go into the build, and it failed. Can you all tell me why did it fail? What should I do a bit differently? What should I do differently out here? Anything? Can you see which point it failed? It was able to go into, let's say if I look into the logs, right? No credential specified. It's good because you do not have a credential there. Cloning remote git repository, it cloned this out. It said, okay, fine, this is what the commits are and all that stuff, and it kind of cloned the remote repository. So the first step of your project is done. So let's track this back. So this is what I want to do. I want to troubleshoot. Okay. So if I go into configuration of this project, it's general. There is nothing. Source control management is good, right? This step is passed because it went ahead and it did a git clone. It was able to get the git.exe and it did a git clone out there. So this is good. So where did it fail? It failed here in the .NET restore step. And if you look at this particular project out here, you look at that build run out here. I look at the console output. What is it telling, guys, out here? You'll have to read this, guys. This is the reason basically I am making the builds to fail. What is it telling right now?
Yeah,
.NET
we
is
need
not a recognized. Exactly. What do we need, Chandra?
SDK, .NET SDK.
Exactly.
I'm not.
We have not put .NET SDK at all. Meaning, if I even give a .NET command here, it says .NET is not a recognized as internal or external command, meaning I don't understand what you're talking about. The operating system by default doesn't have a .NET compiler. I need a .NET. So what I'm going to do, I realize this now and say, okay, fine, you know what? Yes, I need a .NET now. I'll say download .NET SDK. I need a software development kit for .NET. Says, okay, fine, ultimate experience and all that stuff. Let's come down and say .NET SDK download. And the latest framework that is right now that is currently going on is the 5.0. This is the current basically. And I'll say this is the x64 SDK that I need. And I'll say run. I'll say install. So I'm installing a .NET SDK of 5.0, and this will make sure to set something known as what? A path variable or an environment variable in my system. So installation of .NET SDK. This is another point that we need to add to our notes. That while doing Jenkins installation of Git, fourth one is what? Giving Jenkins in the global tool configuration. Give the path of Git. git.exe. Fifth one is if you are building a .NET Core, please basically go ahead and give the path, or please basically go ahead and install something known as the .NET Core SDK. Please give the path of what .NET Core SDK out here. This is what you need to give. So I have like installed .NET Core SDK. I'll say close, and now if I say, okay, why did this open? Okay, fine. This is my local machine. If I go and open this out, and if I now do a .NET, okay, let's close this out. Let's open a new session and try to do a .NET out here. Say .NET restore -h help. Now it says, you know what? I know what you're talking about. I know now what you're talking about, because when you install .NET Core out here, what did .NET do? What did the installation do? Is that it set something known as an environment variable. Environment variables, yes, this one. You have a path for that particular .NET SDK. If you go into this path, right, this was set during the installation. You will see something known as SDKs out here. You will see something known as software development kit out here, and you have something what .NET exe. This is very, very important to do. A .NET exe is there. That's the reason you're able to do it. So now what we'll do is that, okay, fine, your system now has the .NET installed. Now let's come down to Jenkins, and let's come down to the random codes project, and let's do a build now. And did it fail again? Yes, it did fail again. Let's see why it failed again. Okay, git.exe is checked out. It again failed on the same command. .NET is not an internal external kind of thing, meaning you'll have to restart the server. You'll have to restart the entire server, because right now it's just telling you that I don't understand what you say, meaning this Jenkins server, right, it did not pick up your .NET. It did not pick up your environment variable. So what I'll do is I'll instead of restarting the entire server, first I'll just try restarting Jenkins. How do I do that? Come here, program files, go into Jenkins. This is jenkins.exe, right? I'll open up the command prompt out here. Say jenkins.exe space restart. It's restarting, telling that it's restarting this particular service called Jenkins. You can also do a jenkins.exe stop and then start. Anything works for me. And I'll wait for that particular Jenkins to kind of come up again. So if I kind of go into this particular dashboard and kind of do a restart out here. Now it says assign in, meaning the service is now running properly. So I'll say test user Microsoft -001. If it still doesn't work in this point, then we'll have to restart the entire server. So firstly, before restarting the server, let me go ahead and try this out. It'll take me a second to see if the build passes or fails. So I'll say, okay, fine, build history. This is the build history out here. And let's go ahead and try to do a build again. Let's say build now. Let's go to the console output. So now it's at least not failing. It's now able to recognize my .NET. It's telling that .NET is not recognized in everything. It's trying to restore all my projects, and it'll try to do a build and it'll try to do a publish if that works fine. So this is the configuration, or this is how I am being very careful about how I basically integrate a Jenkins with, let's say, a GitHub repository and etc. So this is the initial configuration what I'm doing right now. Now once this project is done, right, next what we'll do is like we'll try Jenkins with Azure repository, and we'll try to do a continuous integration with Azure repository. We'll see if it works or not. So now it says, okay, fine, what, Jenkins is publishing. It says okay, all the projects, it's determining all the projects and all. It's doing a Jenkins publish. Sorry, it's doing a .NET publish. Guys, any questions still here? Now it's success, and it's green right now.
Where the artifact is stored in the GitHub
So
repository?
no, not in the GitHub repository. It will be stored in the Jenkins server only. Artifacts that Jenkins built will get stored in only this repository. I'll show you also how the artifact is stored. Right now, it did not generate an artifact. Right now, if I go to the, let's say, back to the projects and go to the last build, right, it did not publish any artifact out here. It just build your project. That's it. Because for artifact publishing, Chandra, you have used another step called publish artifact, right, which will zip it and kind of publish it, right? That is something
Yes.
that you have not used in Jenkins here. So I need to go into the location where Jenkins has produced the artifact. So let's do that before we go ahead with Azure repos. Let's go into the output. Jenkins is mostly manual, meaning you'll need to have a bit of understanding on how the .NET and exactly works and all. That's the reason we did Azure firstly, because that's morely of a self-help kind of a tool. Understood what .NET Restore and all that stuff is, and now coming down to Jenkins. Now if you come down here, you will have all these things out, which is workspace and all that stuff. This is the path what I'm really interested into. So I'm just picking up this path. Oh, sorry, this is my local machine. I'll go to the server, pick up this particular path. This is the default workspace where Jenkins normally works out. Bin, release, .NET Core, all these things. All these things is the path of where Jenkins is storing your artifact. So let's copy this path. I'll just come down to my Jenkins server, which is running on localhost 8080 on the virtual machine. Go into this particular project, say configure, and this is not a build step, it's a post build step, because build is all doing what it's giving you a build and it's doing all that fancy stuff out here. But in a post build action, what I'll do is I'll say archive the artifacts. Where is that? Oh, this is, sorry, post build action. I'll say archive the artifacts and I'll give the path of the artifact. It says what, I did not find anything. Perhaps you meant this particular thing. It's called random quotes bin and all that stuff. Perhaps you meant this particular path. I'll just take this out. That's it. I'll say apply, save, and give another build. Now it's going for another build out here. So let's wait for a couple of minutes and see what it's giving you. Or let's go to the console output and track this out. It says failed because no artifacts were found with this particular pattern, etc. So meaning I'll still need to go inside this particular publish and then kind of pack this entire thing out. So let's me configure the build back again. So Jenkins is a lot of trial and error until and unless you get it right in the first time. It's a lot of trial and error. Jenkins kind of needs a lot of human intervention out here. So what's the path here? It's like publish. So let's see, publish. I'll say save and I'll just say apply. And let me go for another build out here. So again, a lot of trial error. I'm not even sure if it.
What we are doing now, so we are changing the artifact path to the different location.
Yes, I'm just not changing the artifact path. I'm trying to zip the entire artifact. Now it says, what, the step archive artifact, no artifact which with the particular pattern, kind of got, I did not get this out and all that stuff. So I'm just changing the path where the artifacts are being generated. I'm just changing the path where the artifact is becoming, kind of getting generated out there. So maybe I'll have to give a / out here so that the entire folder gets zipped. So I'll say apply and I'll say save and I'll say build now. Let's try this out. But it doesn't work out, not a problem. We'll use another tool basically to archive this out and etc. So I am just identifying the path where the artifact is getting generated, meaning after the build, right, it's getting stored in this particular location, workspace quotes, and then it's coming down to this, and see, now it produced the artifact inside a path called publish, and inside that particular path, please take all these files and publish it out, or please take all these files and zip it out. So if I go into this particular build, it says this is the build artifact, random quotes and all that stuff. So I'll say publish. Now you see all this is something that you wanted to zip, right? So this is how you generate the artifact in Jenkins. So I am just telling you go into that particular location, and I'm telling what, all these are the files, because I know that it's generating the artifact here. How do I know that? If you look at any step like .NET publish or .NET restore or anything, right, it's by default going into this particular location, which is the home directory of Jenkins, and then giving you the artifact, right? So that's how I identified it. Does this answer your question, Chandra?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm zipping out the artifact so that I can use it at a later point in time. Now the question here is that if I want to integrate Jenkins with Azure repository, till now what I'm doing, I am using something like this repository out here, where I'm telling Jenkins that what, go to this public repository. But in your real-time project, this will not be a public repository, right? All your code will be sitting in a private repository like Azure repos. Let's say you are making use of a feature called Azure repos out here. How do you do it? Let me come down to this particular project. We'll say files, and inside the repository, what I'll do is I'll say, instead of new repository, I'll talk about importing a repository right now. And I'll talk about importing a repository right now. And I'll say, take the entire link of this repository. How do I import it into Azure repos? And I'll say this is sample codes, because random codes is already a repository name, so it'll throw me an error. I'll say sample codes. If your GitHub repository is also authenticated, right, you should say require authentication, and you should enter the username and the PAT token. But it doesn't require an authentication. I'll say import. I'll just go clone everything from the repository and give it to me here. So see, it's going into something known as GitHub something.com. It's cloning everything out there, and it's giving me and it's telling me that what, import is successful. Now what I did is essentially turn this repository into what, private repository, right? This is a public repository, this is a private repository right now. Then how do I integrate private repository with, let's say, Jenkins? I'll go to the clone. Okay, I'll copy this link to my repository. I'll go into Jenkins now. I'll say configure. Now the source management, the source basically of your code is not Git, but it's Azure repos. As in when you give this and kind of save this out and come down to the configuration again, it actually should throw an error. Yes, it threw an error telling me that what, I failed to query this particular repository. Because what you're doing out here is that you are asking me to download code from something like an external repository, a private repository like Azure repos. How do you expect me to go ahead and log into it? For which what I'll need to do is I'll say, okay, don't worry about it, add a credential out here, global credential unrestricted. This is the username. I'll say come to my Azure repos, generate credentials, take the username, put it as a username out here, take the password, copy whatever password that you have, put the password here, say add. Once I added it, right, I'll get the credential in this format, and now the error is gone. I'll say save, and let's do a build now. I've scheduled a new build right now, and this build right now, this build right now is going into the Azure repository. Now you see, it's not the GitHub repository. It went into the Azure repository, took the entire code, doing a .NET restore and all that stuff. Like if you go here, it's now going into this particular repository out here and taking all that code, pulling all that code from my Azure repository and then doing a build. And then it gave me the artifact successfully. Like we go back to the status and all, it says build artifacts and publish. I have all the artifacts that are generated successfully out here. But this is a manual build, right? How do I do a continuous integration? Meaning, if someone commits something into this repository in Azure, I need a build to trigger in Jenkins. Can I do that? Of course I can do that. But I need to do something on my Azure repository side, not on my Jenkins. What do I need to do? I need to configure something known as a service hook. How do I do it? Project settings, service hooks, and let this load out. I already had a service hook out here for Jenkins. So what I'll do is I'll just delete this out. I'll say create a subscription. This is what you will see. So create a subscription, and the subscription is for Jenkins. I'll say next. I'll say whenever there is a code push that is happening into, let's say, a repository like this sample codes here, branch, any branch is okay with me. Any group which is publishing it, I'm okay, I'm good with that. Integrate it with Jenkins. And it's now asking me the Jenkins base URL. Guys, what can be the base URL that I need to give here? Anyone?
IP address.
Sorry?
IP address of the Jenkins server.
Exactly.
IP
This
address
is the
of the
same thing,
Jenkins
right?
server.
Right, exactly. This is the same thing until here. I also need to mention the port out there, right? Done. Now it's asking me for username. It's asking me for something known as user API token. What do I do here is that firstly go to the Jenkins server, go to the dashboard, say manage Jenkins, and let's say manage users. If I just remove this out, this is the test admin user, right? I'll say settings, I'll say add a token, I'll say Azure DevOps token. I'll say generate one. I'll copy this out. I'll go into my Azure server, paste it out in the API token out here. The it automatically took up the build, meaning your token is right. It was able to go into the Jenkins server, see all the projects, and was able to get a build pipeline out here. And I'll say test it out. It said okay fine, I have queued a build, can you check it out? This is 8th, say pending finishing and all that stuff. Now it triggered a build because I have triggered it from the Azure repository. I can say finish and I can add this token. Now whenever someone comes here into this particular project and does, let's say, a change to Jenkins, now if you, let's say, see, this is the 8th build that got published, right, or that got triggered, right? Now let's say if I go to the readme.md file, let's say test again, something like this. I'll say commit onto the master, just leave it. it will now after us, after a while, it will now go ahead and let's say, see, it went ahead and triggered another build. This is how you can do a continuous integration on a server like Jenkins using something known as service hooks on the Azure DevOps side of things. This is integration of Jenkins with Azure repos. Now the question is, we are building great, but how do you deploy it? Now when I started with Jenkins, right, we had a plugin called VSTS. Using this, I could have directly pulled the artifact and deployed it onto the Azure DevOps server. Meaning I could have gone here into something known as manage Jenkins, into something known as manage plugins, and I could have just search for something known as let's say available. I'll say VSTS. But this plugin, right, is deprecated right now. Microsoft is no longer promoting this plugin because it's all about coming down to a business and asking you to use Azure DevOps for this. And if you look at Jenkins, right, it's a bit tricky, guys. Jenkins is a bit tricky. You need to have a very solid hands-on on Jenkins in order to master it. Jenkins is definitely a bit tricky well compared to Azure DevOps. Now, even if I install this plugin and try to do all that stuff, it won't push my code. And see, it is very, very old. 5 years. That's the period where Jenkins was at its peaks. And if you're using AWS, right, you'll still be using like Jenkins or something like this, TeamCity or something like this. But you do not have a server. I mean, you now have, let's say, when you're going for a role like Azure DevOps, you now have CI/CD in Azure. That's something that you can use. But the reason that I took this class is we need to understand how to configure Jenkins. We need to understand how Jenkins works. So what we will be doing tomorrow when we connect is we'll try to do a CD with Jenkins, but this time I'll be using some different tool. So I'll be using Jenkins as my CI server, Azure repos as my Git. I'll be using Azure repos as my Git. For CD, I'll be using a tool called Octopus. I'll be using a tool called what? Octopus for CD. We'll also see how to configure Octopus with a practical project and how to do that all. So CI is continuously integrated with Jenkins. That's something that we did today. This artifact should be pushed to a server called Octopus. And from Octopus is where I'll take this to Azure Web App. This is the integration what we are going to do. And how are we going to do? We are going to follow the documentation of Octopus and then try to do it. We will see how you follow, meaning how you basically build your project following something like a documentation, which will help you all very much. Following a documentation and doing it in a self-learning style will help you all very much. This is a project what I'll explain. The project what you need to do again is take out Jenkins from the picture. After Jenkins, can you use Azure pipelines, do a CI, push it to Octopus and then do an Azure Web App? Like, will someone do it? Highly unlikely, but can you do it? Yes, you can. We'll also see how you can use this service. This is going to be our execution scheme for the coming classes, guys. So any questions till now with Jenkins, anything till now?
So we are achieving everything like Jenkins, Octopus, and everything in Azure DevOps. But this is the open source codes, open source tools, so that we need to know. That's the reason we need to learn, right?
I'm so sorry, Chandra. I just lost your audio. I had some issue with my headphones. Can you repeat your question?
So we are achieving whatever we are doing in Jenkins and Octopus in Azure DevOps.
Exactly.
So, but these are the open source tools, so that for extra knowledge
Extra,
we are
yes,
learning,
exactly.
right?
Learning it, yes, correct. So our core, right? Our core. That's the reason when we were doing Azure DevOps and we completed Azure DevOps, I said 80% of it is done. But you also need to know, or you also need to have a know-how about what Jenkins is. Because Jenkins was in market when Azure DevOps was not even, not even in the market at that time. So you just need to understand that there is a CI tool called Jenkins. How do you do it and etc. Again, Jenkins, if we need to learn end to end, right? That's again a very big course as such. Like it will take at least like about 30-40 days to learn Jenkins because there's a groovy language what Jenkins follows and all that stuff. So this is just a know-how of what Jenkins is and how can you integrate Jenkins with something like an Azure repos. Or I mean, do you know what Jenkins is? That's what it is.
Can we push code from the, I mean, can we push code from the Jenkins to Azure web app?
Yes, you can, but not directly. You are using another tool called Octopus in order to push it out. Even that's an open source.
Okay, so it's not possible in Jenkins itself.
Like it is possible. Like you have something known as Groovy scripts and all. Like you need to basically do Jenkins in the entire Groovy format. It is possible, but it is a bit a lot manual process out there. You cannot have approvers and all that stuff, all that steps out here in Jenkins. That's another story. You can definitely do it. That it's not impossible. You can definitely do it. But we earlier had a plugin called VSTS, which made our lives very much easy. When Azure DevOps came into picture, they stopped the support of VSTS because why does Azure or why does Microsoft want to develop another plugin for CI when they have Azure pipelines, right? When you can use Azure pipelines, why do you want another server like this or another service like this? That's the concept behind why Microsoft went ahead and deprecated Jenkins or deprecated support to Jenkins. So yes, right now it is not a straightforward. We are taking it to a server called Octopus and then taking it to Azure DevOps or then taking it to Azure. This is just to avoid the entire idea of Azure DevOps. In this way you can entirely avoid bypass Azure DevOps and do it. But again, if you are going into that role, right, you will 99% use Azure DevOps only as your primary CI/CD. Because one thing, guys, you need to observe is that Azure DevOps is firstly free. You do not need to spend out a lot of money out there. Secondly, you will any which ways, spend some amount of money when you're using cloud because you are, spending some amount of infrastructure out there. Now, Jenkins Octopus would have been, let's say, our main topic if we were doing a cloud like AWS. But Jenkins is our side topic when you're doing a cloud like Azure. Is that okay, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Any more questions? Anything else here? Okay, so no further questions. We'll close the session for today. And guys, Akila has not joined the call today. Can you please inform her not to delete this server? This is a Jenkins server. Can you please inform her over the group not to delete this out because we'll be using the same server to install something known as Octopus tomorrow. So please inform her not to delete this out, not just in case if someone is in touch with her. Please do that so that we'll save some time tomorrow not to reconfigure Jenkins again. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Have a great day ahead, and we will meet tomorrow. And we have a holiday on Friday. So this Friday, since being Dashara, we'll be having a holiday. So we'll meet tomorrow, and we'll discuss about Octopus tomorrow, and Octopus with Azure DevOps. Sorry, Azure tomorrow. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.